Right, good morning, everybody, and and welcome to this session on behalf of the Global Sourcing Association's Symposium. My name is Terry Wilby, and I'll be chair for this session. I'll introduce myself shortly. Just to note, this session is being recorded. The GSA has a large global membership, and not everybody can make this time zone, so this session will be recorded for replay purposes. So if you are watching the recording, welcome, and thank you for taking some time with us. For those of you that are live, we will have a question and answer panel at the end of the session. So we've got some short presentations from our esteemed panelists, and then a Q&A at the end of the session. If you do have questions, please do post them in the chat window, or if you prefer to ask your question in person, then if you raise your hand, we'll come to you at the end. You can turn on your camera and interact directly with the panelists. So without further ado, this session really focusing on responsible automation, taking a slightly different look at how automation is changing the world of work. My name is Terry Wilby. I'm Chief Executive of Blue Prism Ventures. My history with automation is long, having spent a long time in the world of service provision on the supply side, and then in technology from a vendor perspective. In 2013, I founded a business called Thoughtonomy, which built a vision of a digital workforce of the future, if you like, a cloud-based virtual workforce to augment the way that organisations resource their business. That platform was acquired by Blue Prism in 2019. That became part of that organisation. But continue with that vision that the power of this technology to change the way the world works is really fantastic if it's harnessed in the right way. And that really is the subject matter of what we're talking about today. So automation has a huge role to play, not just in improving efficiency, but in freeing up people. And as we enter this strange world where there's a huge global skill shortage, actually it has a huge part to play in freeing up people to be able to fill some of the gaps that exist and allow organisations to be much more dynamic in how they resource themselves in this changing world. So hopefully some of those themes that we'll touch on today, how service providers are using automation, are they doing enough to free up resources and to improve the lot of their buy-side customers? What does the future of work look like, and how does that affect the workforce of the future, and how should we be thinking about that? So we've got some really interesting perspectives from our four esteemed presenters. Tony McCandless, who's the Chief Technology Officer for EMEA at Blue Prism, a former colleague of mine from 20 years ago, who was we reignited in the guise of Blue Prism. We have Tremaine Richard-Noel from Northamptonshire General Hospital, where he heads the emerging technologies function. Got some really interesting perspective on what those guys are doing with automation and how that's affecting not just efficiency but patient care. We have William Harris, who's the Group Chief Digital Officer from IQEQ, and Kimberly Fletcher, changed from the billing, but Kimberly Fletcher from Fathom, who have a really interesting take on how organisations should be thinking about what comes next when they're running their automation programs. So hopefully a very exciting and insightful morning and session for all of us. So I'm going to pass over first to Tony to take us through what you're seeing now on screen, the future of work with responsible intelligent automation. Welcome, Tony. If you'd like to give yourself a brief introduction, that would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. And yeah, Terry and I were discussing when we worked together about 20 years ago. I probably had hair at that point, but yeah, life moves on. So I joined Blue Prism about 3 months ago, and that was on the back of roles client side, where I had been Chief Information Officer for a global payments company covering Europe, Middle East and Africa, and also then moved on to Thames Water, where I spent 3.5 years trying to rebuild our digital capabilities in order to serve 25 million of the UK citizens with critical services. And then latterly spent 6 months advising a company on its future IT strategy. A commonality in amongst all of that has been the requirement for really customer-focused business leadership at digital enablement. And it's never been an easy balance to achieve. And I think that, as Terry has said, there are lots of things that we need to consider and ways and means by which to, manage costs, but really deliver critical customer outcomes, no matter what industry you happen to be in. So yeah, a pleasure to be asked to present this morning. So when we think about, responsible intelligent automation, for me, it's very much looking, at what is actually driving change here, just in the world. And you'll notice there is no mention of the C word on any of these slides, but we will talk about it. Customer experience, the expectations around customer experience have massively changed, and it isn't just the younger generation. Many people are expecting instant service. We've talked about Netflix-like experiences. Financial sustainability, even without the pandemic, it has been challenging as organizations have seen costs rise, profitability fall, competition increase. Climate change and sustainability, I'm sure nobody missed COP26, and just the critical aspect of how do we really get a grip on, getting to net zero. What does that mean for everyone? Rather than words, what does the action look like? And, as someone that's come out of certainly CIO roles in 2 industries that are heavily regulated, those regulations can change overnight, and they can have substantial impact on your organization's ability to operate at a profit or however else. And it can just be soul destroying when a regulator comes in and puts something in where everybody's working really hard, and yet they come and rip money out of your organization because you didn't meet some target that they came up with. Now, there are 4 things, but when you look at also things that I think everyone is feeling now, the aging infrastructure and workforce. And when we talk about infrastructure, that can be across lots of different areas, utilities, software, all sorts of things. And we do have areas that are suffering here. And the workforce piece, which links into the future operating model, as Terry has said, current operating models are unsustainable. We are seeing dramatic change in society today. And, we can kind of touch on some of these aspects in kind of looking at 6 forces that are at play. And we talked a little bit about the evolving customer expectations in terms of demand and experience, asset obsolescence. Stuff is driven by environmental factors, technical, but economic and financial. When we look at the impact to the global economy and then economies in countries and regions, some of the shock waves that have come in and some of the schemes that people have needed to put in have had direct impacts on organizations' ability to respond. And if we take, a very simple example in financial services, where across the world, people were looking for relief from things like mortgages and debts, financial services organizations overnight were expected to process that stuff and get back to people. And they can't be left waiting weeks and months to know, are they getting that relief or are they not? This is really critical stuff. And, I'm sure we'll talk about the NHS and health services, really critical things that are happening. And when we talk about social aspects as well, access to basic needs, we see, as Terry said, a real shift in what is going on, how sustainable are people's lives, and the ability for even welfare type organizations to be able to respond to people's needs in the event of unemployment and other requirements. And then the work transformation itself is incredibly interesting. And I personally, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I can guarantee at least a dozen of my peers have used the phrase, I'm hanging my boots up. And we see a trend, certainly in the 50+ age bracket in the workforce, that people are going, we've taken our organizations through a massive shock in terms of the pandemic, but that's forced people to reconsider their life balances and what they're doing. And some people are making the choice to go early and say, it is not worth me spending another 10x amount of years. I want to work out how much is enough. And you're seeing a lot of people walk away from the world of work to have a different life at the top of the age range. But equally, for people that are coming into the workforce, their demands, and listen, I'm a big fan of this, their demands are very, very different. They're no longer going to turn up to work, 9 to 5, having been through an hour and a half tortuous commute. These people are now saying, no, work needs to fit us. And therefore, as we all responded to the pandemic and kind of went remote where we could, people are now saying, well, that needs to become the norm. So we have a completely changing pattern there. And then, to touch on a real point that Terry's made, and look, I'm definitely not going to move into any political thing here, but, we see that there's a shortage of workforce, and that's a global scenario. But in certain countries, and certainly the UK, we see massive shortages in staff, and some of this might be a self-inflicted wound via Brexit, but nonetheless, however we got there, we're seeing 1 million plus vacancies. And I'll give you a statistic that it'll be interesting to see our health colleagues comment on. For nurses applying for jobs in the UK, we have seen an 80% drop in people from the EU applying to come and work in the UK. And we have massive gaps. It's not just lorry drivers, it's not just the care industry, hospitality, but there's gaps everywhere, and we are all struggling to fill roles. So, across industry. So a whole load of changes and factors. And, when we move on to kind of when we think about it, how do you get organizational agility and build resilience in? And, if we look at an example from utilities, I certainly won't name the company here, but what they've done is really taken this thing about saying, right, look, automation is no longer this thing that's going to come and steal everybody's jobs and impoverish the world, okay? It never really was, but people like a dramatic headline, right? What we have to work out is, how can we combine a workforce where you have a capability with a digital workforce there to take work away from people that, to be quite honest, to pay a human being to do some of this stuff is absolutely underutilizing all of the great things that our people can do. So how do you identify that work? How do you offload it? And it's not robots replacing people, it's intelligent automation able to augment people, help them do their jobs a lot easier, maybe at a greater pace. But when you're talking about people who are dealing with customers or patients, or the other day I talked to Times Higher Education about students, you want to be spending the time having human-to-human conversation, not being a slave to the system that's asking you in front of you for more information, or it's torturous to get the information you need. And when we look at, a hybrid work scenario, what certain companies have done is work out how to get that blend there, to give people access to resources, but also new learning models. And if we think about anything that most of our organizations have had to deal with in the last 2 years that we didn't so much before, learning is about so much more than just the technical. We're now needing to have access to things like mental health skills. How do we manage ourselves? How do we as managers and leaders spot on other people? And then we see some statistics here about certainly the utilities industry, which, I've been part of, that there's more and more penetration of artificial intelligence, intelligent automation into these industries to help field force as well as office. And then, last bit on this I will talk to will be new businesses. We have a customer in the energy business who actually have more digital workers than they do human workers. Because when they set the company up, what they said was that we are automation first. Automation is not an add-on. We need to embrace it in our core design rather than it be a follow-on add-on. So, a couple of examples, and I'm sure we'll hear more today. And then when we kind of look at the state of the nation, where are we with intelligent automation? And, what is intelligent automation? It is far more than just a robot clicking where a human being would have. It's the ability to add decision making. So if you're processing mortgage, holiday applications, it can actually go through, use your criteria, score it, and get that done. I spoke to a customer yesterday who was able to process this stuff in a day. a single day. So if you applied, the decision was there, and that helped people. So when we look at where are we with the adoption of intelligent automation across various industries, you can see that there's lots of work going on, but when you move to the right of here, people that have this in production are scaling it up within their organization. There is still a huge amount of opportunity. And for someone that has been a CIO, customer side, my greatest regret was that I didn't know enough about the capabilities that certainly Blue Prism, but intelligent automation in general had. And I left things on the table at Thames. I could have done a lot more had I known and would have the capabilities that certainly Blue Prism and others have today. And that is about helping workers do the job to serve the customer. So really, to kind of summarize, and I don't want to take too much time, work has changed. It's going to continue to do so. People at the upper end of the work age range are leaving across multiple industries. New entries coming in want to know, they want to demand that the work that they do is rewarding. They want to actually be able to have some influence over when and where they do it. And work to live is absolutely a mantra for those that have, the blessing of being able to get into the workforce. Automation is definitely not a social cloud on the horizon. It's a real tool to help organizations do the work they need to do. 2 years ago, you might have said, meh, I'll use it, I might not use it, I'll get some additional profitability. Now, with a challenging workforce, it really is a case of, if you're not doing this and you have challenges, you've got to ask yourself, why are you not looking at this as a way to help your teams, help your customers? A critical point as well is that security, we've all seen the things about cyber security. It is critical. It really is. You've got to have systems that are designed with cyber resilience and data protection in mind. They're non-negotiable anymore. We've seen enough headlines about data leaks. You've got to be picking systems that are designed this way, because if you're not, you could be hacked into and have data breaches. And then, the last part here, social and environmental responsibility and flexibility with your workforce are now key employability factors. People are going to be coming to you and saying, what are you doing on environmental? How can you demonstrate it? And automation can help there. What are you doing about helping me be flexible? And I think these factors, in order to attract employees at the very start, are just absolutely critical. So Terry, that was all really I had this morning to cover off. I hope that kind of maybe opens up a few thoughts.
Fantastic stuff, Tony. Thank you for that. And yes, it does. I mean, great perspective and some new themes, I think, emerging from what you said that hopefully we'll explore a little bit more. The impact on sustainability, social environment responsibility, and that's role in being or attracting employment, but also I think, and if we have time, maybe we'll get Kerry to speak on this, that social environment responsibility and its place in the supply chain as well. Organisations wanting to see somebody's sustainability capabilities as part of making a vendor selection. So it talks to employment, but it also talks to how organisations are contracting with each other or choosing their supply chain. So really interesting themes. I'm sure we'll have a chance to chat a little bit more in the Q&A later. But as Bill, what I'd like to do now is pass over to our next presentation. So Tremaine Richard Noel. Tremaine is, as I said, head of emerging technology at Northampton General Hospital, and actually a Global Sourcing Association award winner. So was recognised for the work that he's done in Northampton with his team. As part of the recent professional awards. So delighted to have him with us. And Tremaine, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. So can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. So I'm Tremaine, and I'm the Head of Emerging Technology at Northampton General Hospital. Head of Emerging Technology is obviously not a role you hear every day, so I get to play around with automations and AI. It's a bit more serious than that, but get to explore how we can use technologies to deliver better care. So I'm going to go through sort of our journey with automation, the things that we've learned, and what kind of this meant during COVID. So as Tony's covered, the world has changed. So starting with sort of how we got into this. So in March 2020, I think if with hindsight, being a beautiful thing, automation was something that was needed pre-COVID, and COVID meant that actually this is something that's something that's even greater importance. So in March 2020, we started our journey by I remember it being quite an interesting one, where we had an urgent use case to look at oxygen monitoring. So like lots of other NHS organisations, oxygen supplies were something that was being carefully monitored, and a few trusts had issues. So we were going to get somebody to go and log in every hour 24/7 to capture data on the tank readings, and we're sort of like, actually that's I thought perfect example for where we can use an automation. So the challenge was, the deadline obviously for that was more like, yeah, can you do it yesterday please? And we hadn't had any sort of automation capability before. And by the end of the day, we had an environment set up, and we built a basic automation, because it wasn't a complex automation needed, which kind of demonstrates that this isn't something that needs to be sort of super complicated. It is something that you can get started with pretty quickly. So for us, that kind of grew organizational confidence, because we'd developed in front of the organization. So everyone was around sort of looking at that. There was a bit of misconception, people expecting to see robots walking through the corridors doing tasks, which I'll kind of touch on how we did some of the sort of education around this. But for us, it meant that effectively we could repurpose time, and it gave us confidence to explore explore this technology in a different way. And clearly, during with COVID and backlogs and lots of sort of demand, we needed to scale. So we'd started to scale up the what we were doing. So we had pulled in some business analysts, trained people on using automation, and started to look across the organization, where are the sort of key points that we could apply this. So as you can imagine, one of the key pain points was around onboarding. We had to have a lot more staff. How do we do that? How do we do that quickly? So there was lots of sort of bottlenecks where we could apply automation there, and we could build sort of simple automations, and we got good at that, but needed to sort of scale further. And I'll kind of touch on some of the sort of automations that we're now sort of looking at and sort of we've grown into. So I think one of the challenges we had, and I kind of joke about this, is we had to grow pretty quickly working. So we received some funding from NHSX, because clearly there was a sort of national need for this technology, and worked to identify opportunities that could be spread across those organisations. Speed of 3 months to do that was quite is quite significant, and as you can see, I had my first grey hair during that time, which was not an achievement I wanted, but it meant for us that we could start exploring, actually, is there commonality in processes? So in lots of organisations, I mean in most, you have complex environments, and the NHS is one where different organisations that are trying to come together, when you look at the processes, everyone does it slightly differently with slightly different systems. So trying to find commonality was a challenge, and we found areas, but there's it's something that's constantly being worked on, and how we can sort of scale and share automations. And now we've kind of gone pretty far ahead, and I won't touch too much on this, but we're now sort of working with 30 plus organizations. So I think, interestingly, the sort of intelligent automation piece is one part of the puzzle. But looking at sort of emerging technology, it's sort of interesting how now we can add, adding machine learning and other sort of cool things into the mix. You can enhance automation significantly. So we're sort of finding that now we're moving into a world where there are endless options for technology, and it can really transform the way patient care is delivered. So especially now with a backlog from not being able to see patients during COVID, it's important to see how we can use this technology to help and to sort of free up especially with automation, to free up time to basically focus on being human, and that's no more important than in healthcare. So the benefits, and this is more sort of showing the benefits that we've had. So for us, it's meant that, one, increased staff morale. So there's a lot of fear that you hear around, and the Terminator did not help with that in terms of an image when you start thinking about robotic process automation. But the bit that's interesting is when you sit down with staff and say, how can we make your life easier? How can we take some of these tasks that you're doing that actually you'd rather not do? How can we hand them to an automation, and what would you do? And often the response is, oh, well, actually, we'd be able to spend more time being proactive, and it often translates into more time for patients. And as mentioned already, like the NHS does not necessarily, there is workforce challenges across the NHS. So it's key to free up as much time as possible for clinicians. Improved data quality is like a massive one that we've used automation for. So there's lots of legacy sort of information databases, all of that side of things that we need to update, and also things like record merging we do now with automation. So we have our pathology system, there's sort of 300 exceptions or so that come in each day that need or basically the data checking, and we can use automation to do that, again freeing up staff. So for us, some of the things that we're looking at the moment, let's just give you a flavour of it. So in healthcare, there's at the moment the elective recovery is a huge area. So we're sort of looking at how can we help with sort of appointment booking and rebooking. So often there's sort of teams that are doing that manually. So using automation for that. Areas around booking of tests, supporting with referrals, booking treatments, and doing some of the tasks that the clinicians, that typically do, but actually we can free up time to focus on other bits. So reducing that sort of admin burden. So what's interesting is obviously this can be applied across the whole sort of estate, as it were. So we found that it's as useful to finance as it is to clinicians. I shouldn't really say this isn't the most exciting automation, but I'm sure it is. So we're referencing sort of invoice queries, helping with staff onboarding, and merging records is one of the key things we've been doing at the moment. And there's sort of like your standard stuff around staff onboarding. So actually just generating when someone starts, not having someone manually do that is really helpful. Using automation to quickly get people into the organisation and started is really critical. And one of these are now not so much in development, but three sort of interesting use cases to kind of share. So one is around sort of antenatal care screening, and this is where we use looking at a machine learning model. And this was something I sort of say stole, but I was inspired by an organisation in the US doing this, where they looked at the expectant mothers to be in terms of when they signed up to the service, and looked at the risk to those mothers to be, and booked them into the relevant clinic quickly and to the right clinician effectively. And what they found is that reduced the sort of harm to those expectant mothers to be. So we're building that model at the moment, which is exciting. The disciplinary equality one is kind of a automation for good piece. So one of the interesting things is you never really say can you use automation to tackle equality. Isn't something that's typically bandied about, but one of the things we saw was that in the NHS, there's national data around showing that staff from BAME backgrounds are more likely to go through the disciplinary process, and that's sort of a national trend. And the process is the important part in that. So what we have done is build automation that will go and check and reference the staff record, and can go off and will go and do that, and be able to escalate that to a senior HR manager to basically close it down as soon as possible and help reduce any inappropriate disciplinary procedures. So there's interesting use cases across the piece that aren't just about sort of like improving efficiency and time, but actually experience and things like patient safety as well. So as I mentioned, and when I first had this slide from our team before, I remember sort of going, what's this all about? But actually it became more and more clear to us that this was really an important area around sort of how we position the programme. So what we found is if we start talking to people in the organisation saying, can we come along and install a bot for you, use that sort of terminology, it wouldn't necessarily get the buy-in we wanted. So we had to think around how do we talk about automation, how do we encourage people to use automation, and where we landed was sort of having a adoption centre. So sort of thinking adoption, all things fluffy, cats, dogs, that side of things. So each of our automations, we give a face to, we humanize, we give them a CV and a business card, and it kind of tells you what it will do and how it will interact. And what that's helped us with is, because it's visualized what effectively is going on in the background, one, more people come forward and say, actually, can we have an automation? Two, they appreciate this. Almost, people appreciate automations in a slightly different way. So when you've sort of personified it a bit, people are sort of going, oh, thank you, responding happy that automation is there. It's part of the team. And as mentioned, there are organisations now with more digital workers than actual workers, because there's just so much there to do. And we've built and this is sort of a separate piece, but we've built a sort of community hub to kind of share this across the NHS. And I think this is one of the challenges in organisations, is sort of sharing this knowledge and information. And that's one thing we've done. So in terms of what we're looking at now and some of our vision, so we're sort of growing to try and encourage as much sort of cross-platform reusability as possible. So sort of sharing all the documentation across our organisations, sharing as a standard, aligning development so that we're building things once for all where possible and avoiding duplication, sharing licensing, setting sort of clinical standards, and sort of sharing training and events. So for us, it's been a really interesting and exciting journey with automation, and it's just at the start, really. There's so much potential, especially in healthcare and lots of different areas. So I'll stop there and take questions later on. But thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tremaine. Really interesting story, I think, and particularly because of the opportunities, not just in driving efficiency, but the kind of patient care angle is really key. And something else you introduced there, this idea of using automation to tackle equality issues, I think is quite a good segue into some of the topics that Will's going to talk about. So as we said, we'll take some questions at the end. Hopefully, again, what you've said has stimulated some thought in people, and please do post your questions, or I'll be ready to ask them if you have any. I've got a few thoughts bubbling, but in line with the agenda, what I'd like to do now is pass over to Will Harris. As I said, Chief Digital Officer of IQ-EQ. I'm sure Will can do a better job of talking about what that means and also some of his history in automation than I can. So I'll pass straight over to you, Will.
Thanks very much, Terry. I mean, how do I follow that presentation? I thought that was amazing to see what Northampton General are doing only down the road from me, Tremaine. So it's great to see. So for everybody I've not met, there's a lot of you on the call that I do know. My name is Will Harris. I'm the Group Chief Digital Officer of IQ-EQ. We're a financial services company specializing in alternate asset management with around 500 billion US assets under management. It's a fairly sizable organization within our world, although it's made up of about 4,000 staff. My background in automation spans over a decade now, primarily in management consulting, focusing on operational, organizational change and advanced technologies, which ultimately led me to take the Chief Digital Officer role here. What I'm actually going to talk about today, however, is my other hat. I'm also a doctoral researcher on gender and ethnic diversity and applied artificial intelligence. And what I'm going to talk about today is the impact that AI and automation has on gender and ethnic diversity, and some of the things we can do in order to be responsible in how we apply these technologies. It's very well known that there is a great deal of gender disparity in the world. What's probably less considered is how artificial intelligence impacts on gender and ethnic diversity. We only need to look in the press in order to ask ourselves, is AI an ist? Is it a racist? Is it a sexist? Is it any form of ist, which is typically a bad thing? There are good ists, feminists, for instance, but by and large, an ist is a bad thing. Recently, Amazon have been in the press for having an AI recruiting tool that showed negative bias against women. If you're a woman, this was October 2018, I think this came out, that you're about 40% less likely to get an interview when you were put through the AI recruiting tool. Amazon, of course, scrapped it once they identified the bias. Robots are racist. It's a fact. We can see this. They're not racist as in they're running around trying to commit genocide, but we see disparity in how automations, machine learning algorithms treat people from BAME community versus white Caucasian. The irony is not lost on me that I'm a middle-class white male talking about gender and ethnic diversity, but it is what I research. So what we can see and what we see consistently in computer science, as it says here, garbage in, garbage out, what we start seeing is these nascent issues within machine learning algorithms that are reflective of those who created them. We're indeed looking at how one can legislate for this in order to make the creators of algorithms responsible for what comes out the back end. That's an extremely complex area. Facebook were in the press only in September, rather egregiously in the press, as their AI was labeling black men as primates. What happened is, if you were watching a reel that had black men in it, the Facebook AI would say to you, would you like to see more videos of primates? And of course, when they found that happening, it's not very good. They needed to go and take some drastic action. And what we also see is AIs, both Facebook and Microsoft, very famously last year, had to turn off their chat AI capability as it was scraping from Twitter and minute by minute became more sexist, more racist, more misogynistic. It's an interesting observation that the internet, much like nature, is big and evil and trying to kill you. And when you build a robot that learns from it, it quite often becomes not a very nice robot at all. Some of this is to do with inherent bias, and some of it is to do with applied bias. So the inherent biases that exist in society need to be considered when we're building our machine learning algorithms. And then there's the applied piece. What I'm going to focus more on, I'll talk a little bit about inherent bias here, but what I want to focus more on is the applied bias, things that we can do something about it. Because unless you're a computer scientist, an advanced mathematician, somebody building neural networks or machine learning algorithms, everything I've just said is interesting, but we can't really do anything about it. We don't build the algorithms that lead to these bad characteristics. What we can do is look at how we apply things. I'm going to bring this much more into focus and more into reality now about the things that we work with around RPA and automation. Before I do that, I want to reinforce some of the inherent biases that exist in society. So women make up 18% of computer science graduates. There's no surprise then that machine learning algorithms have a typical male bias. What we do see here is it matters what language you're in. Allow me to give an example. If you ask a German to describe a bridge, because in German it's a feminine word, they'll typically talk about it being beautiful, about it being a piece of art. If you ask a Frenchman to describe a bridge, they will use typically male words because it's a male word in French, and they'll talk about it being long and strong and big. And these ways and mannerisms of just talking and how we interact with each other lead into how we build things. So when only 18% of computer science graduates are female, there's no doubt that we see a lot of male dominance in the field of computer science. 38% of mathematics graduates are female. That is wildly up on 10 years ago. So we're making good direction, but again, mathematicians make up a huge portion of the people building machine learning and neural networks. No doubt we will see male bias there. Only 15% of the UK STEM workforce is female. So again, reinforcing this male dominance of how we build our tools and capabilities. Only 6% of FTSE 100 CEOs are female, and oddly, it's the same statistic, only 6% of the S&P 500 CEOs are female. That means what we observe is that men also have a 31% higher salary than women. The figures for last year in the UK, a woman on average earned £20,503, Office of National Statistics. A man earned on average £29,879, again, Office of National Statistics. That gets really interesting when you get up to the top 10% of earners and how the disparity happens. Again, it's typically these higher salary roles that are involved in AI and automation. 94% of CEOs, see, I can do maths, 100 minus 6, 94% of CEOs are male and 80% of workers in technology and engineering are male. Interestingly, these are the 6 companies in the FTSE 100 that have a female CEO. That's it. There's only 6 of them. ITV, GlaxoSmithKline, Severn Trent, Whitbread, Imperial Brands, and the NatWest Group. Funnily enough, 50% of the female CEOs in the FTSE 100 are called Alison. Don't know why, but 3 of the 6 of them are all called Alison. So I suppose that might be something to look at there when we think about regression modeling and what makes a good female CEO. So that sets the scene really as to demonstrable bias that still exists in society. Yes, of course, we're making good progress, but these are statistics from the ONS from 2020 and puts us at a good baseline. Why does this matter? So we have both vertical and horizontal disparity in an organization. And when we're thinking about automation, this is the bit that's really important. So vertical disparity, I think most people will know about. I'll go through it in a second, but horizontal disparity is probably something that's not particularly well considered. So if we think of an organization of having 7 ranks from graduate to CEO, fairly commonly accepted grading, at the graduate rank, publicly at the moment, let's take an organization such as mine, it's not uncommon to see a positive skew towards bringing women into the organization. So you might have 60-odd% of your organization being female at the graduate level. That then reflects itself through to middle management. It's not uncommon to find organizations that have achieved a 50-50 split at middle management between the genders. It gets a little more skewed when we start getting up to director and vice president, which starts being more around 80% men, 20% women. And then when we get CEO and president, as I've just shown, that's only 6%. Now, why does this matter? When we apply RPA, we are typically applying RPA to the bottom 3 ranks of an organization. This is where the rules-based repetitive type work typically exists, and means we're having a negatively skewed impact on gender and ethnic diversity in our organizations without even thinking about it. People talk about robots can't be racist, they can't be sexist, they don't care, they just execute, but they reflect those that built them and they reflect the organizations in which we place them. This is meant to represent that in all my years of doing this, I've never replaced the CEO with a robot, but I have replaced plenty of call center workers with robots, or moved away from having to recruit more people in the junior ranks with robots. And it's important for us to consider, if we want to be good ESG organizations, good corporate citizens, as to what our automation programs are doing to the gender and ethnic diversity within our organizations that no doubt everyone's HR department is currently considering. So what? Right, so a few bullet points of my considerations about what we can do about it and things to think about. So firstly, bias is not bad, right? That people shout at me all the time when I say that, but if you let me finish, bias is a necessary requirement in life. Bias is why we weren't eaten by lions and why we evolved to be who we are today. Bias allows us to complete an incomplete data set and make decisions. So bias in itself is not a bad thing. There are, of course, very bad biases that we shouldn't have, and we need to be aware of these biases, whether we're designing a machine learning algorithm, whether we're building a neural network, or whether we're doing something as simple as applying an RPA robot into some common element of our organizations. We have to allow for it in our calculations. I'm yet to meet somebody through my research or in my professional life who, when they're building their business case for automation, captures the gender or ethnicity of the people that they're going to be impacting. It's not considered consequence until after the fact, and we should allow for it. We need to understand the skew that is bringing to our organizations, and we need to account for the impact. And what's really important is we need to remind ourselves that equality is not about being equal, it's about being equitable. It's perfectly fine to give a skewed bias towards one sect of society in order to bring them closer to parity with other sects of society. Just giving everybody the same amount of rice is not equal. You give more rice to those who are hungrier. That's equality reflecting equality. We need to measure our gender and ethnic impact. And as I just mentioned, we need to look at equity for equality. The training and reskilling element is really interesting. If we go back to some of the stats I started with how few, if we focus on gender for a minute, the percentages of women involved in STEM subjects, what we see from the World Economic Forum is AI is going to have a net positive impact on global jobs by about 3%, but it is heavily going to skew away from manual labor-intensive work into STEM type subjects. When we start looking at what these numbers are and we aggregate the amount of women involved in STEM, the amount of job displacement and the amount of retraining, we really are facing a complication where we could start going backwards rather than continuing to make the forward progress that we've made over the last decade or more in bringing much more parity amongst women and those of ethnic minorities. So it's important when you're doing your automation programs that you consider that training and reskilling. So that's me. I wanted to share. I'm doing my doctorate. I haven't completed it yet. I'm halfway through doing my research, and it's really interesting. A lot of this stuff that's coming up. I've not seen many people outside of academic community talking or considering it. And given the opportunity to come and talk to you all today about responsible automation, it seemed a good place to start the conversation on how is AI and automation impacting gender and ethnic diversity in our organizations. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's really, really insightful, and definitely brings a new focus, a new perspective on some of the implications of these programs and some new thinking that I'm not sure we see too widely in terms of impact of automation and change programs in general. So certainly something we can explore later. And by a masterpiece of scheduling, thanks to Kerry and Abby, you know, that kind of segues really well, I think, into some of the work that that Kimberly and the team at Fathom are doing. I won't try and talk to it because, again, they'll do a much better job. Kimberly will do a much better job than I of introducing both herself and then Fathom as an organisation and some of the things that they're doing to kind of address this future of work question. So, Kimberly, can I come to you next? Oh, Kimberly, you're on mute.
There we go. Failed at the first hurdle there, but I'm in. I'm in.
There's always one. There's always one.
Oh, definitely, and it would be me. So yeah, I'm Kimberly. I'm a marketer here at Fathom. Thank you very much for the introduction, Tony. Many of you may be expecting a tall Irish man if you kept up with the agenda. You can consider me as a December bonus edition in my red Christmassy top. So delighted to be joining everyone today on the panel to discuss what the future of work might look like and the impacts of automation. Now, my background prior to Fathom is tech industry and talent. So automation is a trend that I've followed for a while in terms of its impact on businesses and the kinds of talents that they're looking for. And I'll also introduce some background on Fathom and the sort of problems we solve as well for those that are less familiar with our business. As everyone is aware, the world of work is changing in unprecedented ways. Tech and business advances have accelerated as a result of the pandemic. Use of artificial intelligence is increasing, and also remote working, which Tony earlier touched on. The makeup of our workforce is going to continue to evolve over the continuing months and years. Thanks to greater automation, shifts to digitally enabled roles, and also transformation across many parts of our economy, including health and finance areas that we've touched on already. And all of this is impacting our demands for skills. Businesses are having to be adaptable and flexible and prepare for the changing nature of roles and skills. We can't prepare for the future of the economy in 2030. We've got to be ready for it right now. And businesses are appreciating the need to act, but until now, few had access to the data and the insight that they needed to chart an effective path as the work evolves. And what Fathom has done is it's made it possible to visualize the impact of automation on people and the jobs that they're doing, the tasks that they're doing. And in this way, Fathom is helping many organizations to transition people, their companies, even entire industries with the right skills, development, infrastructure, investment and services that we all need to thrive in the future of work. Blue Prism is actually one of our partners. We've been supporting some of the companies that Blue Prism work in making this journey. So in sum, what Fathom does is it looks at the impact of automation on jobs and tasks and helps companies to understand the skills that they're going to need and transition people in their workforce to have the skills that are going to benefit them in the evolution of work. So that's us. One of the first things I did, having been invited to join this panel, was I had a look into outsourcing because it wasn't something that I was incredibly familiar with. And I quickly learned that it is a massive industry. Nearly 500,000 jobs in the US are actually outsourced externally to the US. So that's a massive number of people affected there. And it seems to be very much the operational parts of the business, the bits of the business that function day to day. So there's so much change and opportunity in this sector. A lot of the roles that are in outsourcing overlap with what Fathom technology views as being highly automatable, having sequential tasks that need to be repeated. And obviously automation grants a great opportunity for us to augment our roles as human beings and spend more time using the human skills that we have and the creativity and collaboration and interactivity that we can bring to the workplace. One of the areas that was touched upon earlier in our session was customer service, with 54% of companies using third-party support teams to connect with customers, and some of these roles being automatable, allowing customer services to focus more on the interaction and less on the administrative side of their roles. And this presents a huge opportunity within outsourcing. And then there's also the fact that many companies are offshoring development to acquire talent that's very sought after where it's available. As technology has grown, so has our demand for the people that can work it. And one of the things that we're seeing is we're not quite growing the skills as fast as we're growing the technology. So security and many of the IT service roles are actually being outsourced. And we must talk about finance here as well, and something that we touched upon with William as well, his industry. Finance is actually one of the fastest automating sectors. Germany is the front runner here, anticipating to automate around 35% of tasks within that sector over the coming 5 years, and many countries are not too far behind. And so as we can see, that's going to be a large number of people in roles that are affected by automation. And so it's absolutely critical that we prepare for this. And that's sort of Fathom's mission, is to prepare every worker everywhere for the future of work. Obviously, we want to prepare, we want to be, as William mentioned, good corporate citizens, and we want to make sure that we have a fair and equitable future. If we think back to those slides on vertical and horizontal disparity, automation actually impacts our recent hires the most. And so as we are trying to, I guess, compensate for, errors in our history where we perhaps haven't recruited equally between the genders, between different ethnicities, these are actually the roles we're automating out the fastest. So it's important that we look at what these roles are, understand what they are, and are able to put together a reskilling path so that these people can enjoy fruitful and fulfilling careers, because that's automation can be all about on the people side. Businesses, I think, as well, are increasingly recognise that if they automate their employees, they have the potential to automate their customers. And businesses, they're as bought into as having gainful employment as anyone, because it works better for the economy if we are all there to spend our money. So we all need to be earning money to spend. And so we're all working towards this, filling this talent gap. And it's a case of looking at how we prepare And that is one of the things that Fathom is helping businesses to do. So one of the things I've done in advance of this session is to have a quick look at the technology jobs that are going to be added to the UK workforce over the coming 5 years. And many people will be not surprised at all to hear that 6 out of 10 of the top 10 growing tech jobs all have data in the job title. So if you're going to learn any tech skill right now, I think anything to do with data is going to hold you in good stead. We're going to be hiring for around 10,000 software application developers, closely followed in numbers by data engineers, data analysts, system software developers. So there are a lot of tech jobs that are growing. It's not just the fact that we're automating workers out. There are these opportunities for us to move into these growing sectors. And then something else as well as technology jobs, all is not lost if you're not in a technology job. As an organisation, Fathom has been looking at the changes that the workforce are going to see, the type of tasks that are going to be impacted, and the skills that we're going to need for these tasks. And what comes out time and time again is how important human skills are for this. And some of the 32 future capabilities that we're going to need are very human. So things like learning, obviously machines learn what we teach them to learn. So our ability to learn and deploy that knowledge quickly in new roles is going to be tried, tested, and cherished by employers more than ever before. Another is value orientation, and that basically means taking responsibility for the results of your work and seeking opportunities to add value. Again, something that machines would struggle to replicate. So it's the people in jobs that are going to have to look at what technology is going to perform, how we can optimize it, what the opportunities are, given that part of our jobs may have been taken by technology. How can we now deliver better for our customers? And the people that do this well will ultimately do better. Cultural and social intelligence, again, another one. Such a global world, and many of us are remote. So without intimately sharing space or intimately knowing each other's contacts, we have to be able to build these relationships to collaborate. And collaboration is going to be so key with us progressing with technology and enjoying this pace of change together. So advice is definitely to go out, experience the world where you can. Even if it is simply through film and the arts, it's important for us to engage with the world around us. And to finish, I would say critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, again, are going to be important in us looking at those challenges of the future. COP26 obviously touched upon. We need to be able to problem solve, think critically about what we're doing as humans, and creatively come to solutions for our futures. And with that, I will hand back to Terry.
Kimberly, thank you. Thank you for supporting us today with some really interesting perspectives on and some fantastic technology, I guess, to underpin this kind of mapping of what does the future of work look like, so that organisations can react to it. Have you got any customer examples that you can cite, or is that kind of stuff under non-disclosure? Your customers have used Fathom to deliver a positive outcome?
A lot of this definitely under disclosure, but what I can say is that speaking to William's interest in creating an equitable future, one of the things that one of our mining clients has actually done is analyse their automation plans versus the impact on the staff that they employ. And they found actually that the gender impact was felt much more starkly with women. So they were able to then obviously look at changing their roadmap and looking at reskilling initiatives to how they can retain those women within the workplace. So the technology is definitely there for us to make those gains.
Fantastic. So it's possible using the Fathom approach to kind of map out, to Will's point, the gender and ethnic impact of those programs, like the roles that you've got in the organisation.
Absolutely.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Okay, great. Well, we're going to go into an open Q&A now. So if you, as I said before, if anybody in the audience wants to get involved, wants to ask a question, in fact, please do ask your turn your cameras on, ask a question in person. I know there's a few old faces that usually like to get involved in these discussions. Joe, Ian, James, and others. So please do feel free to contribute. And you know, panelists, if you've got questions of each other that you'd like to ask, then again, please do get involved. Will, maybe I'll come to you first. I just wondered, you know, you painted to some degree a fairly stark picture of you know, of some of the impact that this technology is having that maybe doesn't get exposed or hasn't been exposed to us. Did you, in the research, come across any positive examples where organisations are thinking about this and actually doing something about it?
Yeah, great question. And there are organisations that take it quite seriously. I've not seen many organisations considering what sort of low-level AI or RPA type stuff will do, because it's just not a conversation we've particularly had. We've not felt the impact of it yet. But there's plenty of organisations that are looking at ethical uses of artificial intelligence and considering how they can change the data input or change the algorithms that are generating machine learning. UNESCO have got a whole paper on this. The World Economic Forum published quite a lot in this area. The other place that it is being used well, certainly Amazon, off the back of what their algorithm was doing in putting women in a worse position, they've rejigged the algorithm. That now means if you apply to, or so I understand, if you apply to Amazon Web Services who don't have gender parity at the moment, you'll have a skewed benefit by being woman or BAME. So they're using this technology to try and drive equity into an organisation to attain equality. The bad news is the World Economic Forum think it's going to take 217 years for us to reach workplace equality. So we're probably not going to see it anytime soon.
More to be done for sure. Tony, is there something that you've got a perspective on, either from your days in kind of buy side CIO or now you're in vendor land?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I mean, one from vendor land, as you term it, is one of the sessions I was on last week with Times Higher Education Supplement. To William's point, these folk are very, very conscious of, you know, machines do what human beings tell them, which is kind of where, you know, the biases can come down to. And they're trying to deal with spike things like intake. And what they found is that if they guard against building bias in, that in actual fact for them, in moving in the UK, it's UCAS, it can actually remove bias from university applications, and therefore not bother about social class or, you know, ethnic backgrounds and things like that. And it gives a much better, more even kind of a response. So yeah, you know, that's been good to see in it kind of what could have been a negative turned around into a positive there. And certainly, you know, from CIO angle, I think, you know, so much of the stuff we've heard, Terry, it's kind of hard sometimes for CIOs to introduce automation into organizations because everybody in an organization is busy. And, you know, traditional ways of introducing, you know, having process maps on walls and all of this sort of thing, it takes the business's time. The business of they are serving customers. So anything that you can use techniques like, you know, process intelligence that kind of can do a lot of that work in the background without interrupting the business, you know, are really, really critical, I think. And, you know, there's a question from Kerry, I noticed as well, you know, about other things that we could have done. I would have used process intelligence first at Thames to paint the art of the possible and be able to go to the business and say, look, here's the things that using that systemic view are opportunities for us to add automation. Do you agree? And the other thing I would have said as well is that too often, you know, RPA, as it was in the previous generation of intelligent automation, has been a special project in the corner. We've got to have it. The board have got something. They've got to go after automation. Let's have a wee RPA project over here. That's not the way to think about it. We need to get these things out the cupboard, make this mainstream, add the value to the business, to the staff, and to the customer. And then to Kimberly's point, I point blank refused time and again to use automation of any form to recruit people until it can be proven to have addressed the challenges that William's raised. I don't think it should be anywhere near selection of people.
Really interesting point. Tremaine, I think you've got a comment.
Well, it's a comment and a question. Because one thing going through my head is it's hard to believe in some respects that Google and big companies like that have poor testing processes, right? So one of the things going through my head are, is it something that was just completely overlooked? Which I think is that feels like the answer is that if you are sort of designing, so I'm thinking how we design with clinical safety in mind, you start at the beginning, you look, is it going to be safe? If you did that at the beginning, you couldn't build anything. It couldn't go into production. And it couldn't get, in theory, if you were looking at all of that as part of the design. So sort of a question to you, Will, do you think that's kind of what's happened, that organizations have kind of retrospectively gone, oh dear, rather than how do we include this at the beginning?
Very much so. I don't think Amazon, Google, or IBM set out to build robots or AI instances that were purposefully evil in any way, shape, or form. And nor are the individuals, in my humble opinion, racist, sexist, misogynistic individuals either. It's more a reflection of societal bias. And I think societal bias, I'm going to be very careful because I'm not a sociologist, right? But I think societal bias, in my humble opinion, is getting better, as in it's reducing. But as we all know with AI, you only need to have a very small skewed difference that gets put through a repetitive or a regressive network hundreds of thousands of times. Do that whole thing. 1.01 to the power of 365 is 37. 1.00 to the power of 365 is 1. So in a year, even a 1% skew becomes 35 times more obvious. And the thing is, there are times where this is good. COVID, for instance, again, I'm not an immunologist, but we observe, or so it's reported, COVID has a worse impact on Black men. Right, well, in which case, I don't want my AI algorithm to ignore that. Right, we can't, there are times where having race, ethnicity, and other protected characteristics creating skewed bias is a very positive thing to do. So it's a really complicated problem to solve because you want it some of the time, and it's a topic that and obviously as a white man, I get it a lot. Why are you researching this, Will? It's not really impacting you, is it? But it's a topic that people don't like talking about as well. And until we have the conversation, I don't think a lot of it can be resolved.
Great stuff. Thanks both. Chris, I can see you've joined us. Did you have a question you'd like to ask of the panel?
Yeah, I did. I was thinking back to a book I read, and I've got it in front of me just to remind me. It's called Life 3.0 by a guy called Max Tegmark. He's a physicist, and he gathered together a whole bunch of AI specialists back in 2017, and they came up with a series of principles about the way AI ought to work. And the first principle they had was that the goal of AI research should be to create not undirected intelligence, but beneficial intelligence. And then there's a whole series more, which when you read them, they all read really well. I think what I was going to ask was, to what extent do you feel, each of you, that those principles have been picked up in the businesses that you run, or principles similar to that? And to what extent do you think a junior employee would know those principles and feel able to stand behind them if in their work they were being challenged to do something that they thought wasn't beneficial overall?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, who wants to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I'm kind of cool. I'll certainly start off. I think it's a great observation, Christopher, and even if you want to go further back and go and read Asimov's Rules of Robotics, my God, that man was definitely ahead of his time. Look, I did a session in Paris a couple of years ago about responsible use of technology. not just AI, and intelligent automation. And, you know, that wasn't long after the Cambridge Analytica stuff all came out. And it's difficult. And my call there was for CIOs and other people to examine their own consciences about how is technology being used in their organizations. Ultimately, we all have customers, whether the patients, students, whatever else. And, you know, organizations, governments, establishments make use of data in ways that are quite chilling. Personally, I have a personal belief that the right to data should be built into our human rights codicils, and nobody should be allowed to use it for social engineering. But, you know, it's difficult, I agree, in terms of managing that at an organizational level.
Yeah.
Tremaine, I guess, is the guy that's responsible for running the program in Northampton and across your peer group. You know, how much time do you think is given to thinking about this stuff?
So the thoughts going through my head as you sort of mentioned junior colleagues, and I think the danger is that almost there are senior people making decisions who don't necessarily know what those sort of core principles are. I think it comes down to almost like controls. So one of the key things is that I think, as sort of Willa mentioned, it's almost like no one has gone out to create these to be dangerous, but also no one's gone out to sort of go, how do we almost prevent it? So there's almost not a safety net to go, because for me, the way I look at sort of these sorts of things, so it's really hard to ensure that every single person in, say, our centre of excellence, everyone working with automation adheres to the exact standards. What you can do is make a safety net that means it's not going to go anywhere near a living human unless you, or non-living, unless you actually pass those stages. So I think it's almost like safety by design. So I think one of the key things, and it's kind of, you know, it's been going through my head at the moment, is we're finding in the NHS the sort of the standard methodology and automation of like look at the three themes of how is it going to save money, how is it going to save time, how is that time going to be used, how is it going to impact. You kind of always have to step back and ask some extra bits related to kind of clinical safety we do, but almost that impact on equality and diversity. I think one of the challenges that I found with it is the data. So if you asked me how does the process affect equality and diversity, sometimes there isn't even the data on the people being affected by the process to know what their backgrounds are. So you've kind of, it's almost like we need to start from the very beginning and sort of say, and this is kind of happening, is one, we need to know the demographics of everyone we work with, patient, staff, so that we can make informed and supported sort of decisions, and two, kind of apply safety nets so that we don't sort of make the environment so difficult to work in that it inhibits innovation, but that we put the right sort of controls and measures in place so that you're not going to build an automation that gets to the point where it's live and then you discover that it's the idea that you get misogynistic AI. I don't know why it surprises, but it's just the idea of it is like a bot an automation I hate. It just feels like an odd thing. You know what I mean?
It's an interesting point, though. I guess it's a bit of a catch-22 to some degree, because if, you know, picking up on Will's point about positive bias to kind of correct some of these challenges requires you to have the data about someone's ethnicity or biases or sexuality, or, you know, all of these things that you want to engineer out. You kind of need to know to be able to engineer out, and by gathering that data, you're kind of stepping perhaps over a line of reasonable knowledge about your employee base or your customer base or the world at large. So it's a kind of challenging dichotomy. So, Tony, picking up on a point you made about process intelligence, though. Do you think, and we're increasingly seeing, you know, process mining and gathering of data being something that's automated at the front end of a digitization and transformation program. So as you said, you don't have to spend lots of time digging out information. You can have technology do that for you and surface all the things that are going on in your organization. Do you think there's an opportunity for that that mining, that intelligence gathering, to also include some kind of impact assessment or some gathering of not just what's being done, but who's it being done by, what is their makeup in terms of gender and role and level, and all of these things that we've kind of surfaced as perhaps overlooked assets in overlooked implications in an automation program.
Yeah, I think definitely that should be something that we'll look to get out of process intelligence, Terry, because you know, it's so easy to stereotype, isn't it? To end up with, well, you know, recruitment's all staffed by this type of person, and this type of person works in a contact center, or they do this or they do that. And yeah, I think, you know, the whole thing for me is that, and it is one of those regrets, had I used process intelligence first, it would have identified, you know, that art of the possible, but also, to your point, who is doing this stuff. And I'll give an example. You know, we implemented a massive change program. It was already 4 years old by the time I got somewhere. It cost 150 million to do. And I remember sitting down when it landed on my desk after the other 3 people had failed to deliver it. It's like, oh, Tony, you can have this. You know, when I looked at what it had generated as an outcome, I was left aghast. I'm like, we spent all this money, and to Tremaine's point, who designed that thing? Because if it was meant to be used by our population, vast and varied population of contact center people trying to help customers at a point of need, it introduced complexity, specialism, all sorts of things that is the last thing these people needed as they're trying to help a customer that has a problem. And then, and this is one of the regrets, I didn't know at the time that you could introduce intelligent automation inside core systems of record, like SAP, like an Oracle and other stuff. So this thing just, it was a juggernaut, it delivered, but now you've got 1,500 contact center agents all over the world using this massively complex system, who are all themselves very diverse and very different. And had we done the process intelligence first, I'm not sure we would have designed the system the way it was designed. So going back to Tremaine's point, you know, begin with the end in mind, get your design taking all the right things in. And yeah, it would have been great to know, you know, about the people that were using it, to work out how we make it work for them. Because if it worked for them, it works for our customers. And you get into that virtuous circle of positive service, you know. And people, I read a book, you know, going to Christopher's point about books, and there's a great book called Social, and it talks about the social brain and how human beings have 2 different types of brain going on, one that keeps us alive and breathing, and the other that makes us social beings. And one of the biggest motivators that humanity has is helping other people. It's been scientifically proven that actually really is something that we genuinely all want to do. And for me, if we can make digital help people make helping other people easier, then we get paid for this stuff as well. It's just fantastic.
Fantastic. Tremaine, I think you had a point on that.
It's just a quick one, because the comments just made me click, because one of the things I've sort of looked at this week was, I'm not entirely sure that we know exactly the personas of the people that are touching the automations. So when we're building things for different clinician types, roles, patients, we know what they should, on a high level, sort of how it's going to interact the process. But almost when we're designing it, we don't necessarily understand the needs, desires, the work patterns, the tools they have access to there, all of that sort of intricate detail. So we're kind of looking at building some of that, because I think what I've seen is that kind of encourages with that design, so that you sort of understand who you're building for and what their sort of needs are. So it was just a sort of comment on that, because it occurred to me that it's something that I'm increasingly looking at, sort of going, do we know enough about the people we're actually building things for?
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. By the way, Joe from Aviva's had to drop off, but he did post a comment that should update your data. Will apparently Aviva also has a female CEO. Her name is Amanda rather than Alison, but it's another A. So
there we go.
If you want to be a female CEO of FTSE 100, then bring your A game. It's clearly there.
God, that's such a dad joke, Mr. Walby.
Fantastic.
If I can comment on a couple of things I've been hearing a minute ago. Of course, in my research, and I think in life, most people would drive towards a level of equality. But what I'm not advocating is overcomplicating the front end of this. If you're a data scientist or a machine learning engineer or neural network developer, yes, you need to think about this stuff up front, because whether you believe it or not, it is likely that there is a level of gender or ethnic bias in your algorithm, as we've demonstrated with Microsoft, Google, Facebook, etc. But I believe the solution to this isn't overly worrying about this up front to the nth degree. Of course, consider it, but it's actually the actions you take beyond the point of implementation that matter. So I'll say it in a fairly contentious way. I'm of course not a racist, and I don't think of it in this way, but if my robot affected 70% black women and 30% white men, I don't care, as long as I do something to rectify the skewed nature afterwards. So if my call center is skewed to one ethnicity or towards women, and I reduce the size of my call center by X%, and 90% of the people that I've made redundant or I'm reskilling are a woman or of an ethnic minority, then what actions am I taking to recover that? The answer to me isn't don't change your operations, because otherwise we'll be stuck. We'd have never evolved our businesses out of the dark ages. Of course, we have to make these impacts regardless of what the gender or ethnic impact is. But what are we doing to rectify that? We can't put ourselves in a position where it's accepted because robots don't care, because as we've demonstrated, they just reflect their makeup.
No, that's a fantastic point. You can't stand in the way of progress because of its impact. You need to assess the impact and respond to the impact proactively, and be very aware of it. Kimberly, maybe coming to you. Obviously, the purpose of what Fathom is doing is to support the reskilling and reprofiling of the workforce, so that it's building the necessary skills of the future. Do you think that should that responsibility for the skills of the future be pushed further back into the kind of education system? Does the national curriculum support the kind of skills that are required in the workplace of the future? It seems to me we might still be somewhat lagging in that regard.
Yeah, I would definitely feel inclined to agree. Obviously, we've gone through many generations of learning the same school subjects, which is obviously not reflective in the world of work that we're all entering in now. One of the things that Fathom is striving to do, having been acquired with Pearson very recently, is to look at the workforce skills that we actually need, so that we can align resources to train people in the skills that we need in the future. And that's starting from the education sector right through to people that are in roles that are at risk of displacement right now. So definitely something that we're hoping to improve. But yes, I do think it is a very real problem that education perhaps isn't necessarily reflecting the skills we need right now.
Fantastic. And I guess maybe Kerry, bringing you in here, this idea of driving a change agenda, I know, is behind the raison d'etre of the GSA, to take industry best practice and programs of change that might be required to support the better use of technology, a better environment for both buyers and suppliers of business and technology services. And I know one of the other tracks that you've been focused on quite strongly is this idea that the workforce is changing, not just from a perspective of automation versus people, but actually the way those people work. Some of the points that Tony made. What do you think the implications of the changing workforce are?
God, this has been such a fascinating session. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. And it's just, I had all these thoughts, and I don't think I'm going to get them all out in an articulate way because there's so much going on in my head here at the moment. So when we started this responsible automation session off, it was really looking at whether automation could be used to address the huge shortage of talent we've actually got, and whether if people sped up their automations and uses of automation, we could, get more of the industry growth fulfilled. So the industry is going through the biggest economic boom ever. We're looking at anything between 10% industry year-on-year growth for business services and 20% for IT. So huge amounts of growth. And then obviously nobody to fulfill on that. So can automation play a role? That's why we started this off. Because I've got a massive fear that if we carry on taking on all the projects that we're taking on, we could find the whole outsourcing industry going back to where it was, of having a bad reputation of not delivering to time and to budget. So that's where it all started. And now I've got all of this stuff in my head about, the use of responsible automation who is responsible for that, the whole reskilling agenda. There needs to be a push-pull effect. So is it the service providers, and should they be putting that within their RFPs, that they've got this whole approach to responsible automation and what their reskilling agendas is? Or should it be the role of the sourcing professional, that they really need to understand all of the art of the possible for automation and ensure that when they're actually procuring and running RFPs, that there's enough automation, embedded within that, so that they're being completely responsible with it. So so that's one of the questions I've posted is, are organisations actually looking at the use of automation in their RFPs, or should they be doing more of that?
Well,
So both Tony and Will are nodding, so.
Yeah, well, we certainly are. If I take off my researcher hat and put my chief digital officer hat on for a minute, we certainly are, right? From as an organisation that's quite legacy, I'm not exaggerating when I say a couple of our MDs have a quill and inkwell on their desk. They come from wealth managers, and it's all about leather binders and high touch stuff, and probably haven't seen an iPad. To how we're, from a sourcing point of view, we use multiple technologies in creating our RFPs, moving away from PDFs into sort of live RFP responses with video, and they're interactive, and you can model your own fees and stuff on the end of it. And that means that a lot of the people who are selecting us have had to invest in technology to consume this, because whilst we build it to say, hey, look how fancy everything is, here's a video for the director of the organisation, it's more often than not a sourcing person who's making the decision. And I doubt that they're going to want to watch 10, 12, 15, however many people they've gone to. So they're using technology to consume it. And it's sort of an ever increasing complex arena. We're doing something complicated, so they're getting something complicated to review what we're doing that's complicated. And I'm certainly seeing much more augmentation of sourcing experts with technology in our part of the financial services sector.
Tony, you're nodding as well. Oh, you're on mute, Tony.
I'm saving you all from a Labrador barking in the background. I mean, another thing, Kerry, is obviously, and it's funny, one of my daughters is a procurement professional in renewables, and I was chatting to this session with her, and she's actually started also including a demonstration inside responses that she's asking back in for her organisation about how organisations are applying automation within their solutions. So I think for the profession itself, having the ability to get access to some tools to ease things for you guys, but also looking at your suppliers about what are they doing about this. It can't all just sit on your shoulders.
Yeah, very good point. And I think certainly some of the other topics being explored by the GSA on behalf of its membership around things that are creeping into the evaluation of supply chain, automation being one, the ESG agenda being another, and supplier diversity, another kind of emergence from a diversity from a an ethnicity and gender point of view, but also from a size of supplier and diversity of supplier. So some really interesting trends that I know will be explored in much more detail over the coming weeks and months by Kerry and the team. We're out of time, and I'm very conscious that we're all busy people. We could probably continue the debate for hours. I know a number of people have had to leave already, so we'll hopefully watch the rest of this. Thank you, Kimberly, Tremaine, Tony, Will, for your time. Thank you, Kerry, for your input and for organising. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hope it was interesting. Certainly stimulated some more thoughts in my mind, and there's much more for us to do, much more for us to explore. But it's a very exciting place to be working. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Terry. Thank you.